I'm Bob from Hauptwerk Hardware, and today we're going to take a look at these, the Tutti Connection Strips. They're available in two options. One is just like this with the solder pads on it, and the second option is to have header pins inserted in these holes which are along underneath the solder pads. So I had a question from a customer who wants to know, before he buys some, what's the difference between header pins and no header pins? Why would you need them, what do you use them for, and how can they help? So that's the subject of the video, so let's take a look at what we can do with these. Okay, so here's our keyboard. I'm sitting behind it, obviously, as it would be, so you'd play it from this side. So electrically speaking, this is the business end, and there's all the wires are connected underneath. This is just an old one that I use for testing. So what I've done anyway is I've got the first few keys connected to these pieces of wire that are coming out from here. And so here's our connection strip. And the first thing you notice about the connection strip is that when you put it down in front of you, that if you've got the solder pads closest to the keyboard, which is generally the best way of doing it, because if they're further away you've got to route the cables around in other directions, it makes it messy. So if you have it this way around, bottom C is on the right hand side of the board, so they're marked as you go along: C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, and so on. And they're split into groups of 8, and they're labelled COM1, COM2, COM3, 4, right the way up to COM8 here. And then 8/8 being 64, we've got 3 extra connections at the end that we're not going to use, or that generally aren't used. So where the note numbers stop, you've just got X, X and X. So you can actually use those 3 inputs. You could, if you wanted to, connect them to thumb pistons or any other digital inputs really, if you have a use for that, if there's something, some sort of buttons or whatever on your keyboards. But you've got those 3 that aren't used, but you can use them if you want to. So starting at bottom C, we've got our sets of 8 notes, if you like. So we've got the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8, which correspond to these 8 notes here. So you'll see if you count up at 8 you end up at G. And then the common for these is exactly as it says. So one side of each of these switches, if you want, is connected to the common. That's one wire, and I've marked it with some red, if you can see that there, with some red felt pen, so I know which one it is. And all I have to do with that is solder that to any of these pins that say common on this side. So COM1, that's why there's a line right across, because all these 8 pins on this side are connected together. The 8 pins or 8 connections on this side are separate because these are the notes. That's why they're marked C, C sharp, D, but the ones this side are all connected together. So the first 8 connect to this piece of wire. And I've only actually connected up or got the common for the first one. The common for the next 8 obviously would connect to anywhere along where it says COM2. So that's the idea of how these are supposed to work. It just makes it very, very simple that you can just take the first 8 notes and connect them onto there. And the normal way we do that is just take some solder and just prepare the solder pad first. So what we're going to do is melt some solder onto the solder pad, and we do this quite quickly because if you get these things too hot, then they will actually come off the board. They're fairly forgiving, but if you come along with a big old-fashioned soldering iron from 1970 or something, it's quite possible to overheat these and pull them off the board. So we pop the soldering iron onto there, we add some solder, and now there's solder on there. That's all it takes. It's about a second or something, whatever it was I had that on there. And then we do the same to the wire. So we just put a little bit of solder on the wire, so that's only taken like a second or so. And then if we lay the wire on top of the solder pad that we're going to connect it to, without getting my hand in the way, if I can, I'll tell you what, I'll do it from this side. I think we can see that, yes we can. So we just put the wire on top of the pad and then just touch the soldering iron to it, and that's all it takes. Okay, so it's very, very quick to put that on there. Don't leave the iron on there for ages while you fiddle around trying to get the wire in the right place, because if you do, there's a possibility of, as I say, making this pad fall off or come off of the board. So what we then do, that's our common wire connected. It's going to be tricky to get to this side of it. I'll just bend that out of the way and say, I mean, if you get hold of this and give it a good rip, it will come off the board, but they're fairly forgiving. You see me just bend that round, that's absolutely fine. So if we take our first wire now for C, so this is connected to the switch here, and then the second one, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and that's all we got to do is to connect these to there. So we do exactly the same. We get our soldering iron and we just put a little bit of solder onto each of these pads. So I'll just do the first 4 just to show you how that works. Okay, so then we do the same thing, is we take our first wire for the bottom C and we just warm that up with the iron, and that's now fitted onto there. So that's from our bottom C here. The next one is our C sharp, which we've got this wire here. So same again, I've already got solder on the wires, so we'll just put that on there, warm it up, and that's it. So, and then the same for the D, just pop that on there, and then the same for D sharp, if I can pick the wire up, which it seems I can. So we'll just pop that on there as well. Oops. There we are. That's all it needs, is just a second with the iron. So you can see it's pretty quick really. Obviously I'm not going to sit here and do all of these because this is just to show you how to do it and how it works before we come on to what we can do with the header pins. But that's how the solder pads work, and that's the general idea. So what I'm going to do now is take them all off again, and I will then show you what happens when we have got the header pins connected. Okay, so I've got the same connection strip here, but I've added these header pins, which if we can get them in the light you'll be able to see them a bit better, hopefully. So basically they're just these pins that are fitted to the board below where we were soldering. So you've got these rows of pins. I've only fitted the first 2, but they would continue all the way along the board. And the idea is that they're here for people who, for whatever reason, don't want to solder to the board. So maybe if you're not used to soldering, or if you don't fancy the idea of trying it, or I don't know, for whatever reason you may have not wanting to solder to the board, you can use these. And the easiest way of doing it is that you can buy from places like eBay and Amazon and all the usual suspects these kind of leads, which if you do a search for them, I think the easiest search is like DuPont connectors or something, or DuPont header connectors for experimentation, etc. But anyway, you can buy these things and they're quite cheap, and what they are is they've got a little socket on one end, and on the other end you can either have another socket or you can have these little pins. So the pins, the ends with pins, they're called male connectors, and the ends with the sockets called female connectors. And the plan is that these female connectors just push onto these header pins, and they're quite a tight fit, so you can pick the board up with just one of them on there. So you know they're reasonably stable, but obviously they're not as good as solder. So what we do is that we can just connect these one to each of the header pins, and it's easiest if we do one group at a time, otherwise you end up with thousands of wires. But you can push those on, and they always come on these ribbon cables as well, so that's quite handy because you can see the different colours and you know which ones go to which pins. They can be a bit fiddly to put them on, but once they're on they seem to behave fairly well. So that one's not quite in the right place, that one goes on the end there, and that one goes in the middle. So as you can see, they're a little bit fiddly. I'm not convinced really that they're any quicker than using solder, but let's get them on there and we'll see. So there we are. So that's now connected. Hopefully you can see they're all plugged in, and you can pick the board up by them quite happily. There's an extra one I've got on the thing here, but we won't worry about that. So now, how do we get this end of them connected to our wires from our keyboard? Well, what you can use are these things. and these are called Wago connectors, or Wago connectors, or however you want to pronounce it. It says on the end Wago. You can pick these up on eBay. There seem to be a lot of non-genuine ones of these around that you can get from China for next to no money at all. They're probably okay. I haven't got any. I use the genuine ones which you can buy from electrical outlets, certainly here in the UK, electrical wholesalers where the electricians get their bits and pieces from. They're quite happy to sell them to the public normally. There's no problem with that. And the way these work is that they've got two holes in them, and you lift these little levers up. They're pretty stiff, but you lift them up like that, and then you can pop a wire into one of these holes like that, and then when you push that lever down, that locks that wire in, and it's really tight. You can't pull that out. Well, you probably could if you were really put some effort into it, but you wouldn't do that. And then, as it so happens, these little pins on these wires just happen to fit perfectly into these holes as well. So you put that into the hole next to it, and you push the little lever down, and there we go. Black probably wasn't the best colour to use, but you can see it there. And that's well and truly, well, I've actually broken the connector, so that shows how good these things are. It's pulled the actual little plug off the connector, so these things will never fail. These, well, maybe you've got to be a little bit careful with them, but that was extreme force that I used on there. It gives us an excuse though to take that out and pick a colour that we can actually see. So let's do the orange one, and we'll just pop that in that hole there, press the little lever down, and there we go. So you could do that for all of the notes of your keyboard. If you wanted to. You'd probably actually end up having to solder the other end to the keyboard, but you might not, because on some of the organs, or certainly on the older organs, they just have a wiring loom that goes all the way along the keyboard, comes along and goes into the electronics. So if there's enough spare wire on that, you can cut that away from the existing electronics of the organ when you convert it, because you're going to rip all the electronics out anyway, throw that away and replace it with these. So you could just easily connect these to each of the wires, so you wouldn't actually need to do any soldering. So that's the idea of the header pins. I can't say how long this arrangement would last. I imagine once it's fixed in the organ, and if you make some way to hold all the wires down and stop any vibration or anything moving, I imagine they'd be quite reliable over time. But having said that, nothing's ever going to be as good as soldering them on. So if you can find a soldering iron and learn to use a soldering iron, soldering is absolutely most definitely the way to go with this. But if for whatever reason you don't want to, the header pins are your friend. So that's it really, just that quick video showing what the connection strips are for, how we connect them up. This end of the connection strip, it's just got the 16-way connector on it, so we just plug a 16-way lead in there. The other end of it plugs into the Tutti encoder. These are only compatible with the Tutti encoder. It says on them Tutti Connection Strip. They don't work with the universal encoder. So that's it really. Hope you found that helpful. If you did, if you'd be kind enough to hit the like button and the subscribe button, that would be great for me, because it tells YouTube that you're interested, and it helps them move me further up the list of contenders when people go searching for MIDI organs and things like that. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.